Welcome to the BackPageLead Vidcast, joined today by Jonathan Howcroft, who doesn't look a bit like Wayne Carey, but knows an awful lot about the game. Won our Dream Team League by a street last year, and AFL devotee. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to round one kicking off properly. We had a bit of a taster with GWS and Sydney, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and looking forward to seeing the big guys really go at it.
Well, you didn't enjoy the commentary much, did you? And I think a lot of people were left a bit cold by the new special comments men, Cameron Ling and Brett Kirk. Bit hard on them to make a judgment after one round. Let's give them half a season, but a bit of a stilted start.
Yeah, well, both of them are very smart guys. They're very good in many different areas beyond football. But I think there's a situation in sports broadcasting in Australia where ex-professionals that have just come out of the game really dominate, and I think that's to the detriment of the overall production. That there are industry professionals, there are professional cameramen behind the scenes, there are professional researchers. Why do they have to go for ex-players instead of professional broadcasters?
Doesn't happen in the Premier League with Alan Hansen and
Mark
Lawrenson and a million others?
It does, but they're augmented by in-game callers are 99.9% professionals, and the match day reporters tend to be journalists who've gone into broadcasting rather than ex-players who've gone into broadcasting. The ex-players will anchor the shows and they will offer the special comments. And I think what happens is, in the case of particularly people like Cameron Ling, who aren't necessarily the most dynamic on-screen presences, they get mixed messages between whether they're special comments, whether they're in-game callers, whether they're hosting, and I just don't necessarily think it works.
Well, let's talk about the real code of footy, of course, the Indigenous code. And you don't look a bit like Wayne Carey, which is probably a good thing, because it might mean that Collingwood supporters don't follow you home tonight and firebomb your house, thinking you are in fact the king, and made those very dire predictions about Collingwood's chances this year. But we should talk about their game against Hawthorn on Friday night, which I think is the game of the round. It wasn't so long ago that Hawthorn were rank outsiders in this match, I think about $2.30, and there's just been a flood of money for them. They're now $1.70. Collingwood hit by a lot of injuries, 9 or 10 of probably the best 22 might be out. How do you see the game panning out, and do you share the punters' prophecies of doom about the Pies?
I do early. Listening to Rodney Eade on AFL 360, listening to what Nathan Buckley's been saying in the press, I get the feeling that Collingwood are building slowly. So I don't think we can really take a full measure of them until, I don't know, maybe the bye rounds, 11, 12, 13. You look at the outs that they've got, and my big concern is creativity. They've lost Leon Davis in the off-season. They're going to be without Alan Didak. There's a spark missing for me. And while you've got a midfield that's got Pendlebury, Swan, Thomas has got plenty of energy, and Cloak has had a great pre-season. But for me, it's that little spark that they're going to miss. And Andrew Crack is another one that's out for the season. So I don't know who's going to provide that, whether it's Fasolo or Beams is probably going to be another week in the VFL. So I think if you look man for man, Hawthorn for me will be, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 goals favourites at the start.
Okay, well, this is where we'll have our first major difference of opinion. Agree with some of your comments about the injured Collingwood players. The spark will come from Pendlebury and Thomas. They're about as clever as anyone going round. Hawthorn flattered to deceive in 2009 and 2010. They fluked the flag in 2008. Have not lived up to any sort of expectations the last 2 years. Somehow contrived to lose the unlosable final against Collingwood in the preliminary final last year. Absolutely snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Yes, the Collingwood are hit by injuries. Hawthorn are also without their first ruck, Max Bailey. I think the Pies might fluke this one. Well, not fluke it, they might sneak over the line with a depleted lineup.
The question that I would throw back to you is, knowing the amount of players that Collingwood have got out, surely Hawthorn are able to tag at least one of Collingwood's guns out of the game and at least provide 1 or 2 run with players who will do at least as much damage, for example, against someone like Dale Thomas, considering the depth that Hawthorn have got through their side.
I don't think the Collingwood midfield has been that affected by injury. That's all I would say. Beams perhaps is one, but you've got Thomas, you've got Pendlebury, you've got Swan. They're the three main ball winners and ball users. I think Collingwood still a really good chance at winning this game, even though I share Wayne Carey's views about where they might finish at the end of the season. We also should talk about the Thursday night game quickly, the opener to the season proper, and I use that term advisedly, understanding that Sydney have had the first game played on Saturday night. Richmond have lost this game, the season opener, the last 3 times to Carlton, and lost pretty comfortably. I reckon they might be ready to score one. What do you think?
Well, we're filming this in Albert Park, and I can hear a little bit of a growl coming all the way from Punt Road. It's building, isn't it? And there's nothing like Richmond getting on a roll, and I think they've got some genuinely A-grade players now. I think Brett Delidia, Dustin Martin, and Trent Cotchin really are the core of a very, very good football team. They remind me of a position Carlton, their opposition would have been at a couple of years ago with Murphy and Gibbs just about to step up. And in guys like Jack Rewalt and Tyrone Vickery, you've got guys who on their day, they could take anybody apart. And you look at Carlton's outs in their defence.
It's the back line, isn't it? Yep.
And if Richmond can get enough of the ball in their midfield, if they can clear it well enough, then Rewalt and Vickery are just going to lead for fun. And as long as they can kick straight, I would put Richmond pretty comfortable favourites right now.
Okay, so we'll agree on that one. Lots of other interesting games for the rest of round one. Let me just quickly I'll get your tips for the other 7 games. Melbourne and Brisbane, the Mitch Clark game on Saturday at the MCG. I'm going to go for the D's, and I'm pretty confident about that one.
I would go for the D's also. I think the Jim Steins factor will tip that one comfortably over the edge for the D's.
Gold Coast host Adelaide again on Saturday. Adelaide, one of the big improvers, I think, for this year, and shouldn't have too much trouble in accounting for Gold Coast, but it'll be interesting to see their improvement.
Yeah, and you can't ignore that NAB Cup form. The unbeaten in the pre-season, coming into a club playing just their second season. So, again, comfortable victory for Adelaide.
Freo host Geelong. Freo under Ross Lyon for the first time in a home and away match. Be fascinating to see what sort of game plan they start to adopt this year under the boa constrictor himself, the master throttler. I think Freo can win that game. You can't agree with me again.
I am. I'm going to back you. I think it's maybe because you were in purple and you just subliminally convinced me. I think
Melbourne
maybe.
Storm jumper.
But yeah, I think this is the hardest one to call. I know people will talk Essendon, North Melbourne as the closest. But I think this could go 5 or 6 goals either way, depending on which team dominates. As we've seen in recent seasons, Geelong are building for the later stages. They're very good at that. And who knows what Freo is going to turn up. Pavlich and Sandilands didn't play much in the pre-season. And they've got guys like Ballantyne and Mzungu who, on their day, can win games single-handedly. But which Freo is going to turn up?
North and Essendon, a game close to my heart. I saw North beat Essendon at Etihad last year. They don't have a bad record against the Bombers. Might struggle to contain Michael Hurley. There's no obvious matchup for him with Grimer out and Lockie Hansen injured. But, heart ruling the head here. I'm going for the Roos in an narrow one.
I'm going for the Bombers for the reason that you just explained. It was touch and go, and I was probably erring slightly to the Kangaroos, but I think with what you just suggested that will be Essendon for me.
Okay, and let's look at the 2 Sunday games. Bulldogs hosting West Coast. Really unknown quantity, the Bulldogs. They and their new coach Brendan McCartney very much flown under the radar. Be fascinating to see what sort of tinkering he's done to the Rodney Eade game plan. I think West Coast might sneak over the line in this Melbourne game.
Yeah, I think West Coast should be comfortable favourites, but they've got so many outs in their forward line that it's hard to know where they're going to get their goals from. The Bulldogs for me are just a complete unknown quantity. What's Brian Lake going to play like? What's Ryan Hargrave going to play like?
Where do their goals come from?
Exactly, and what do they do in terms of their transition with Higgins, Cooney? It doesn't look like Griffin's going to play. It's I think that should be for me West Coast clinch it, but I think it's a bit more difficult to call.
The struggling Port Adelaide host the Scott Watters coach St Kilda in I think it must be the twilight game on Sunday. Scott Watters big on the circle of trust, which involves players linking arms and sort of chanting mantras and howling at the moon. Sounds like a lot of wank to me. Tosh sounds like a lot of tosh to me. I'm going the Saints, despite all that, to beat Port, and I reckon, as we said, I think West Coast can beat the Bullies.
This is my favourite game of the round.
Okay.
Port Adelaide St Kilda in round one, for the simple reason that whoever loses is on a hiding to nothing. That could be their season over. If Port Adelaide lose at home in round one, their crowds could halve for round two.
Well, do you think they'd be seriously expecting to win after the season? I
reckon they have been revving up this pre-season. I reckon their entire pre-season will have been geared towards round one. I reckon round two probably hasn't even been drawn up yet. And I think St Kilda are beatable. I think their form last year showed that they will blow hot and cold. And I think Port Adelaide have had a real kick up the backside. And I think the key for them could be Robbie Gray running through the midfield. And for any dream teamers and super coaches out there, he's a snip in the 400s. So
a lock.
Yeah, I'm going to tip Port Adelaide.
There you go. Okay, good. Good point of difference. Jonathan Howcroft, thank you so much for your help in looking at round one, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Charlie.